Welcome everyone. Today we have new episode. We will discuss on the startup. This week is very important because we are working with developing nations for climate change and international water day. So many world famous speakers from around the world they are joining and they contribute for World Talent Economy Forums. I want to give special thanks to Professor Adrian David Chiok for your continuous support to World Talent Economy Forum, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald, and we have our special guest, Madam Bahia. Actually, she is working with Harvard Business School. Professor Karin, because of bad weather, I think Professor Karin Kanu, she cannot join. Thank you, Bahia, for joining today's sessions. First, I want to give chance Professor Adrian David Chuk what you want to add, especially for startup. And you know already in India, yes, next year we have a very special conference on Nikola Tesla technology. Already we start our process with Indian government and corporations. We already provide support 3,200 students, as well as we provide support to many corporations, academy, and government. And hopefully next year, February, we will launch our special conference in India. So, Professor Adrian, what you want to say about this special conference, as well as what is your advice for startup?
Well, first of all, about the conference, it's a great topic. Nikola Tesla was probably one of the greatest inventors in history, especially for electrical technologies. I think he published so many patents, and he was successful in a very big way that still we see today, that he invented the AC motor, and essentially he was the one uh, who made AC power a standard, which we still use today. AC power in almost every device, um, and so it's a very good theme because the young people of today can look at someone like Nikola Tesla and have him as a really great inspiration. We tend to only the young people maybe only tend to look a little bit in the past, like they'll look at Apple or Tesla, the car company. But there's great inspiration to look even 100 years ago with Nikola Tesla himself. We need more Nikola Teslas in this world today, and so I think the theme is fantastic because it inspires the young people to become great innovators and inventors, and that is the heart of entrepreneurship. Is some key novelty, whether it's research novelty or technological novelty or service novelty, uh, key novelty that will bring about new generations of companies, and hopefully many young people become very wealthy from their hard work and ideas. So Nikola Tesla is a great topic that for this conference, and I think many young people can benefit from this conference.
Thank you, Prof. Thank you. Thank you, Professor. Professor David Smith, you are expert on startup ecosystem developments. Even your organization ETT contribute a lot for startup ecosystem development, even in developing nations, country like Malaysia. They have Cyberjay, especially Magic, also playing a very good role. Magic also collaborate with World Talent Economy Forum. What is your advice? How we can develop a successful startup?
Well, Sri, thank you so much. There is real important to remember that startups come in all sizes, all flavors. The different markets they're in take different approaches, and even the industries they're trying to impact does it. You know, it's important to kind of step back and go that, you know, a startup can be something that's generated from an idea. A startup could be a spin out from another corporation. A startup could be Science or services that was developed in a university or college and rolled out that way. The most early stage startups uh, either self fund or they do a round of funding called Friends and Family. I tend to add Friends, Family, and Fools to that round of funding because the vast majority of the startups will die in that stage. Um, of that initial round of funding. That is where you begin to pull uh, usually at least two people together, maybe develop a small team, begin to put a high level business plan in place, and begin to look at the market needs and the market requirements. It is important to remember for startups, particularly early stage startups, that one of the best things you can do is you need to look and see where there's a pain in the marketplace and then see if your product can fix the pain in that marketplace and begin to go that way. In many parts of the world, there's many people who can help with early stage startups. Um, in the United States and now globally. You look around, there's things like the entrepreneur associations, young entrepreneurs, young presidents, Tech Start. I mean, I can go on and on. Here in Austin, I was involved with the founding of the Austin Technology Incubator, uh, quite a few other incubators and accelerators around the country, and even had the privilege to speak as a keynote speaker multiple times at the association that represents those. So what you see is there's a lot of help. Some of the best things you can do in startups is some of the best things you can do even with your own career is establish some early mentors, some people who've been down that road before, who have had multiple X and have started up. That when I saw the topic on this, Sharif, yesterday, I counted the number of startups that I've personally helped start, and that was seven. But then I started counting, particularly in Europe and other places, the number of startups I have helped, and it's actually several hundred. And it's one of those areas where you can really put your heart and soul into it. And for a startup to be successful, that's what you have to do. You have to be the cook, the bottle washer. You have to be the janitor in many instances. You have to go and do what it takes to get it done at that time, and put those pieces together. The question you have right now is interesting. So what's something that you work on now as a startup entrepreneur? Like I have multiple companies we've started as part of economic transformation technology. We have a social and emotional learning and ed tech startup that is now out in production and going to market. We have a healthcare platform company that's a startup. We have a telehealth company. We have a land management company. All of these are different companies that we've started as part of our holding company at ETT, but working with quite a few other. At South by Southwest last week and the week before, I was an innovation judge, and but during the conference, we had uh, almost 2,000 companies, most of them startup, submit their stuff to the Innovation Awards. And in our startup pitches there, both the international and non-international ones, there's over 2,500 companies pitching. So the startup community is alive and well. It is increasingly global. Uh, I'm on the investment committee for the International Accelerator here in Austin, Texas. And they routinely get in multiple hundred of international applications all the time and uh, are doing well. One of the International Accelerator startups won best of their category for wearable technology and best of show for a box they manufactured and designed to let blind people be able to see while they're walking and doing stuff. Really neat one. One of the other big winners out at South by was out of Israel. Another one that I particularly thought was extremely well done and rated high was one out of Vietnam. So it's really something that is global and can easily go on there. And I probably should stop there. I could answer some more of the questions, but I'm sure we'll get around to them and answer them as your show goes on, Sharif.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald, what you want to add? I know you have a lot of experience to develop startup from Silicon Valley. So what you want to share with our audience?
Well, I can kind of answer the two questions that have been here so far. Actually, now there's, yeah, two questions that have been here so far. Um, when people are starting startups, there's a good rule of thumb is that you need three things. You need financial capital, you need intellectual capital, and you need social capital. And financial capital, of course, is the money that you need to be able to fund the organization. And intellectual capital is the basically ideas, the whatever it is that you're making that's different than someone else has been able to make. And the social capital is the social connections that you have to be able to implement what it is that you want. And I want to emphasize that because that's the research that I'm most familiar with, because the group that I work with Mark Granovetter at Stanford, we researched the networks of Silicon Valley, the social networks that allowed entrepreneurs to be able to basically create Silicon Valley. And I mean, that's part of what helped create Silicon Valley. And we found, or people have found, that ideas don't come from nowhere. People don't just out of magically think up something that's different than anyone else has ever thought of. There's a wonderful paper called Iron Cage Revisited by a guy named Woody Powell that where he points out that if you think up something that's entirely novel and entirely different than anyone else, people don't understand it. It doesn't make any sense to them. So what you have to do is you have to think of something that's enough different than what other people did, that it's new, but it's enough similar to what other people do that you're able to use existing market channels and other kinds of it makes sense to people so that you can do it. So I'm making that constraint on what startups can do. And I want to talk about, there's a little bit of difference between startup ecosystems and startups themselves. And I've worked in basically quite a few different startup ecosystems, but I want to talk about one that's successful and one that, or two that are successful to different degrees, and one that is unsuccessful. And actually, I know several that are unsuccessful. Silicon Valley is famous as being the most successful one in the world. And how did it get successful? By accident. It just so happened that it started out at the beginning of the Vietnam War. And it was basically a military, it made military stuff. And so when I was a very small child, I could drive along through Silicon Valley and it had tanks as far as the eye could see. And Hewlett and Packard were making oscillators that they sold to the military. And the big organizations there were L'Oreal and McDonnell Douglas and just various defense firms. And that was what really made Silicon Valley. It was fortunate. And it was serendipity that there was another thing that was actually deliberate, and this was very important, which was that Fred Terman, who was the provost of Stanford at the time, deliberately, on purpose, felt that the having different people interact with each other, and the social networks of people, by having those interact with each other would allow ideas to go from one social world into another social world. So he would allow business people to go to Stanford and take courses for 10 cents on the dollar. So, you know, it would cost one person $1 to take, you know, or some multiple dollars, and it would cost the business people 1/10 as much as it would cost ordinary people. So that allowed this mixture of business people and intellectuals or students. And that has always allowed people like Google and things like that to be able to thrive and start out and come out of Stanford. So that was one of the things, and that was done on purpose. That was Vannevar Bush. Terman was a student of Vannevar Bush. So anyway, that and venture capital was sort of developed there, really, and so there was a lot of kind of accidents that made that happen. And then there's what's the idea that once that got started, it grew and grew and grew, and that made it difficult for other people to just say, okay, let's just start from scratch and do the same thing. They're fairly successful at that in Austin, but it's, you know, a lot of catch up to be able to do. And now other places have tried to do it. I've worked in Finland, and in Finland, they've very much tried to do this. In Europe, they have kind of a drawback, which is in Silicon Valley, failure is fine. There's entrepreneurs who've gone bankrupt 2 times, and they can still get money the 3rd time. And basically the idea is, okay, they learned their lesson the first 2 times, so we'll fund them the 3rd time. In Finland, if you go bankrupt, you sweep floors for the rest of your life. I mean, that's it. You're a failure. So people are so incredibly careful about what they do. They call themselves, they say, we're a nation of engineers. We do not want to make mistakes. Everything has to be exactly perfect. And it makes sense in a nation that has fewer people than the San Francisco Bay Area. They don't have the resources to fail as much as the Bay Area. But for every successful company in the Bay Area, there's 1,000 companies you've never heard of that have failed. And that's really how you learn, is by failing. And so that's kind of a difficulty when you're doing a startup. And where I'm going with this right now is to say that when you're doing a startup, what you're going to face is you don't know what you don't know. There was a general during the Vietnam War who was kind of a horrible man named Donald Rumsfeld. And the only thing that I think that he ever contributed that was worth anything was that he said, there's the known knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. And what you're going to face as an entrepreneur is the unknown unknowns, which are the things that you're going to run into that you had absolutely no idea existed. And the only way that you're going to be able to deal with those is to have networks of connections of people that you can ask, what the heck do I do in this particular circumstance? And most people who start companies do it because they have some sort of technical expertise. They have the intellectual capital. They don't have the financial capital, or they don't necessarily have the social capital. But you can build the social capital, and when you have the social capital, you'll be able to get access to the
also,
financial capital, and you'll be able to get access to the basically what you're going to need is financial expertise. And so the most important thing that you can do when you have a startup is open yourselves up to making relationships with as many different kinds of people as you possibly can. Um, One of the top serial entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley is a guy named Suhas Patil, and he told us once. He said, "Tell your story to everyone you can." He says, "You never know who's going to be able to help you. You might meet them in a laundromat." And so that's
Thank you for your great advice. Bahia, thank you for joining today. You are working with one of the startup with Harvard Business School. So, so you can share with us with about your experience and even I know that COVID-19 situation, mental health is a very important thing. I know that your organization working with mental health. So, what is your guideline for developing a startup and what is your story?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Sharif. So, as you mentioned, I while at Harvard, I started to develop a startup which was focusing on e-learning, and then after graduated, I actually moved at MIT, where I had the chance to actually build and develop my startup from there. And as Donald mentioned, I think one of the best thing at MIT is that you are surrounded with peers, amazing peers from all over the world and industries with whom you can share best practices, learn from, but also actually all have all the resources you need at the end, not only financial, of course, but also, for example, if you want to develop an online learning platform, you need an engineer, you need somebody who is able to design your educational content, right? And that's was something very important. And being together, even in a lab working or in a community, was very important. And when COVID hit and MIT closed and everybody was locked down at home, something that came, and it's something that we have to remind as a founder, is loneliness, and is extreme loneliness because it's all on you, especially as a solo entrepreneur who is working with kind of partners, but they're not very sad relationship. Um, and you have to take all the financial stress. You're putting all your economies. During COVID, everybody is just like trying to survive. And something that I will say to startups, when startups, people who want to start their own business, is to really find a strong support network. Yes, financially is important, but most importantly, in terms of peers that with whom you can share knowledge, learn from, constantly build on. Um, a mentor was key to me, having somebody that was there to provide me advice, to support me whenever times were difficult. Um, and also people that are outside your business, people that are not reminding you all the time how hard or nice this kind of business can be. Um, and then that's when I realized that we were all struggling with anxiety, stress in certain times, especially for women entrepreneurs. It's sometimes a little bit more harder when you are coming from a different background. You can find some more backlash. I mean, not backlash, but push back from investors. And that's when I become more and more interested in well-being and mental health among entrepreneurs, especially because we don't have all the perks, the benefits that other people, employees have in a company. We have to think that actually 60% of entrepreneurs in the US don't have medical insurance. Only 5% have a life insurance. So it's quite a vertiginous path, which is wonderful when it works. But as the speakers mentioned here is 1% of startups that make it at the end, right? And you have to learn how to pivot. I was doing something and I focused on something else, and it's not easy. That's when I found out my co-founder Karin, and we started to build on that. And then now we are completely shifting into providing educational resources, mental health and well-being support, and training and resources to entrepreneurs, but also to company, to business schools. We have developed a full module, a collection, soon a webinar with Harvard Business School about the importance of mental health in business. And that's something that I think it's not so much talked about because we are still all idealizing the founder and the great, the charisma that is behind. But we don't have to forget that entrepreneurs, 72% of entrepreneurs are finding mental health issue and are 2 times more likely to suffer from depression. So I'm just saying, entrepreneur for me is the path to the future, definitely, especially as we're facing this uncertainty, all those opportunities. Supply chains in big companies are breaking. So
$50,000 for
So I think this is definitely the future. And when we see the gig economy, which is increasing, today is 1/3 of the global workforce, this is definitely the way forward. But we really need to be aware that we need a strong support network for people that's the most vulnerable in this area.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Adrian, I want to take a question from audience for you.
Okay.
Our audience to know actually what strategies can help to build a knowledge for business. You are professors, you are actually teach thousands of students, even you have a very successful venture in Malaysia even. So what is your advice that when any startup they develop, how they can develop their knowledge for business?
A good question. Um, so it's a very good conversation so far. I think the strategy really there was mentioned before about Silicon Valley is irreplaceable, and because of the history of it. So I think you have to go to the nearest place, which is a kind of hub for entrepreneurs. Um, so, of course, not everyone can go to Silicon Valley, but for example, in Malaysia, there's some areas where a lot of startup companies gather. Different countries. In India, it's I think I'm not sure anymore, but you see Mumbai with all the technology companies in India. So it's a very you can have a brilliant idea, but as it was mentioned before, you need to have the funding. So critical part of that is to find the funding. So whether you're in India or Malaysia or USA, you really need to be able to connect the entrepreneurs who may have some great technology or some great service together with the funders. So that's probably the most difficult part of entrepreneurship, is getting the funding for your brilliant idea. That's critical part.
Yes. Yeah. Professor, another thing I just want to know, let's say, as you are from academy, still you are working with a university Japan. So how actually
Yes.
the modern education's helping the new entrepreneurs? Uh, what is the like model? How does like how actually startup can get support from new educational system?
Yes, well, our university in Tokyo is in Tokyo, which in Japan would be definitely the best place for entrepreneurship. And um, so every student has to do 6 months of internship with a company. So not just teaching academic things from the textbooks, but also they should get real experience in the companies. And it's also quite unique in the fact that every student must start up a company, go through the process of starting up a company, and hopefully getting funding. So uh, developing an ecosystem where we invite more than 250 companies to come and see the students and their projects, and hopefully connecting them with the companies, with the funding, and to make their project, university project, turn into a real company. But this is still new in Japan. It's nothing like in Stanford or MIT, where they've been doing that successfully for many years. So let's see how it goes in Japan.
Mhm. Thank you, Professor David Smith. There are many questions from audience. Like, what are the question you want to respond?
Well, Sharif, I love the questions there. You know, you've heard some of them from answers from Donald and others. What are some of the other options to provide money for startup? And I'm going to give a slightly different answer than Donald, in that in the United States and some of the other countries like that, we have limitations on government money in startups. You can get like small business innovation grants here, but within the EU and uh, in Asia and other parts, there's many places. For example, I know in the European Union, uh, probably 50 companies that have received every penny of their funding from EU grants and other things like that. And that is a place where there is government money around the world. There's also money out of things like USAID, International Development Bank, the World Economic Bank, and others like that, that that will help fund startups. But there's other places too. One of the places that early stage startups should look is look in things like the corporate venturing funds. You know, places like Qualcomm, Intel, IBM, many of the large companies, in particularly through Europe and Asia, they have innovation centers in the company that will fund a startup. Now, they have to work more with you on that side because you're helping them to meet a need of the company. But that's one of the things that can help your startup being more successful. And then there's angels, super angels. Uh, then you hear so much about VCs. I think for many cases, VCs are dumb money and not smart money. Uh, and that you want to, for as long as you can do, is use smart money. Um, and one is a VC a dumb money sometimes. Sometimes it's smart money. But oftentimes VCs work for the people who put the money into their funds who want a return. So part of VC's uh, MO is how can I push you to get revenue to get you being acquired? And not necessarily to start a company that lasts for a long time because they want to produce return to their general partners. Uh, but VC money, particularly on what you're trying to do, is a very valuable operation. Um, the question of how do you ensure that your business will continue to operate without you during the initial startup phase, that's very difficult. You know, you want to go ahead and pull in as soon as you can people who can offload the work, who can help support it, who help grow it and mentor it. But as an early stage startup, that's very difficult. Now, when you begin to get a minimal viable product out, begin to get customers and can begin to scale, that's often the time when you will see many startups, if they're doing VC funding, particularly when they go from A round to a B round, you might see new leadership come in to help too. Someone who can go from the early startup stage to the market growth stage. And that's a place where those leadership changes get made. So in the very early stage of startup, boy, it's really hard to survive a founder, particularly the founder with the idea or with the technology knowledge leaving. Um, and let's see, what was the other one that was there? The other one is what strategies can help to build knowledge for business. Um, that one's a really great one. And again, I'm gonna go back to what I said earlier is you want to network. You want to look at accelerators. You want to look at incubators. You want to look at joint ventures and partnerships. Um, and those go hand to hand with your funding. You want to establish a mentor or two or three. Sometimes you might want to have a mentor who has a stake in the business where you give them some stock. You might want to look at things on how to do that organization. So it's like I mentioned earlier, the International Accelerator. I'm a mentor to um, several of the startups that are there, but they routinely will assign two or three mentors to each of the startups that they bring into the accelerator from outside the country into the United States. And they even have all the startups live together in a big mansion so that they can share knowledge that way and that we can go and brainstorm. But that is one of the really things that helps you build knowledge. The second one, though, is you really have to understand your market. And yes, you want to keep on the technology if you're a technology startup, but you want to continually, while you're in the startup phase, and this is past MVP, you want to go out and scanning the market and see what is available there and how you're doing the other elements like that. Because if you don't, you're going to be in a real problem. The other thing is that you really need to understand the stage of the life you're in for both knowledge acquisition, for funding, for all of those things. And Sharif, you should have a chart that is one of the best charts I've seen. Uh, Let me see, it's page 2 of that one, of the time value graph of where early stage is angels, friends, and family, and the founders. Then you go to strategic investors and venture capital and go through. But the valley of death is that first stage. And there's walls you're gonna hit a wall when you want to go and do more funding. And that is typically before you have a product in the market. And then you're going to hit another wall before you can go and say go public or go different areas like that and with different type of offerings. But this curve and the valley of death in there is very much part of the whole experience that a startup people will go through with it. And it's one that there's just not many ways around it, almost everyone. And even in places like Silicon Valley, in Boston, Route 128, in Austin, in Miami right now, uh, which are some of the strong startup hubs in the United States. This happens, well, I can tell you here in Austin, I see out of every 10 companies, maybe one will succeed going through, being very successful. You'll have two that are marginally successful, all the rest of them fail. And most fail in the early stages of that valley of death. And if you cannot attract strategic investors or venture capitalists or others, that's a pretty good idea that you need to go back and pivot and look at if you can do things different. Last thing on this one, kind of answering the other questions up there, is that as you do your studies, as you build up your knowledge, don't be afraid to pivot. Many companies that are successful today, including some of the unicorns, have pivoted in their lifetime. Let's think about Amazon a minute. How did Amazon get started? They sold books online. They didn't have all the stuff they do today. And they pivoted from just being an online bookseller to offering all the products and services they do today. So that's a great example of a pivot that takes place. But don't be afraid to fail. In particular, you're a startup. It's better to fail fast and then refine it or go do another one than to uh, eventually fail but drag it out even though you know the likelihood of failure is high. So fail fast and fail often is one of the things that you hear in most of the time when you're working with successful people who have multiple successes in their entrepreneurial journey. But there's so many resources out there to help you. Don't be afraid to ask for help. So Sharif, how's that?
Yes, thank you, Professor. Professor Donald.
Well, I want to support a few of the things that David said. I didn't bring up the funding from government sources that you can get in places like Finland and Austria, where I've got a lot of familiarity. I will point out that one of the drawbacks, also Canada, they have wonderful incubators. The Mars incubator is just glorious in downtown Toronto. And one of the drawbacks with those, though, is that you've got to be very careful because your customer becomes the incubator. So what you start working on is what can I do to get my next grant instead of what can I do to get my next customer. And once your grants get withdrawn, you're in trouble because you haven't really been thinking about your customer. One of the questions that's asked that I think consolidates a lot of the other questions is what can you do to keep your company going when you leave? Okay, so what happens when the founder goes? And that, what I want to do is bifurcate the types of companies that exist. And of course, anything that you say like this is a vast oversimplification. But when we're talking about companies and we're looking at pitches or reading business plans, we generally talk about two kinds of companies. Basically, the kinds of companies that investors invest in, and then what we call lifestyle companies. So it sounds sort of pejorative to call it a lifestyle company, but but it's not really. What it is imagine that you have a liquor store, or you buy a grocery store, or my dad had he went to Stanford, but he decided he wanted to just have his own business. And a gas station became available in Carmel Valley, and he wanted to live in Carmel Valley. So he said, great. And it provided him a good living, and he did that for 30 years or something like that. And that was it. He wanted a lifestyle business. So that was the one that became available, and that's what he did. And if you have a business that it could be a clothing store, those kinds of businesses, the way you can finance those businesses is you can borrow the money and pay it back over time, because the business makes revenue, and from the revenue that the business makes, then you can pay back the loan. So you can basically borrow the money and pay it back. So that's a way that you can finance it. You can go to a bank and you can borrow the money and pay the money back. And the whole idea is the business just keeps running. Your point isn't to sell the business. The other type of business is the type of business that David was talking about, that venture capitalists and angels and other kinds of people invest in. And the point of that business is to grow very large in a short period of time. And in order to do that, you have to have very large markets and you have to have the ability to basically grow into those markets in a very short period of time, which requires a lot of money to be able to do to reach those markets, requires a lot of expertise for people to be able to do that, to get into those markets, and it requires timing. You have to do it at the exact right time, because there was lots of people thinking of personal computers at the time that Jobs left. Everyone that's really successful will tell you they were in the right place at the right time. I mean, unless they're raving egomaniacs, they'll be honest and tell you there was a huge luck factor in what happened. So, but what every single person here has emphasized is that there's a lot of failure that takes place. And so when venture capitalists are investing, they know that only a fraction of the companies that they invest in are going to succeed. So the kinds of returns that they're going to need in the companies, whether they're angels or whatever, the 4 F's that David mentioned, founders, friends, families, and fools, are all, they all know that the kind of returns that they're going to have are very high. So people don't, if it's a company that doesn't look like they're going to have 10 times the amount of money that they invested, they're not going to invest in it, because they need to make a lot of money on the companies that are successful to cover all the companies that are failures. So when you hear investors talking about, well, we're not going to be able to make 10 times as much money or 20 times or something like that, you think, oh, they're really, really greedy. But you have to understand that it's an overall environment that they're talking about, that they're going to be able to need to work on. Every single solitary person here has mentioned the thing about networking, okay? And that's the thing that I was talking about social capital, okay? And one of the most profound things that I heard about this that really, really stuck with me, and I want to share with you, is from a guy named Joel Podolny. And he was a professor at the Stanford School of Business, and then he's gone on, and now he's, last I heard, he was dean of the Yale School of Business. And he made he had a class on networking for business people at Stanford, and he made a DVD of it, which I watched. And he had this greatest line, which he said that if you network to get a job or to sell something, and you decide to network for it, it's already too late. So networking is something you do your whole life. You start now. If you aren't networking right this minute, whenever, if you haven't been doing it up till now, start now. Go up today. And how do you network? People, you can read these books where you go out and you get your business card and you call people on their birthdays and things like that. Insincere networking is, you know it, like some person you hardly know calls you up on your birthday and you're like, what the heck? Oh, I see, I'm being networked. It isn't about that. It's about sincerely taking an interest in other people and learning to, because every person in the world knows something you don't know, and you can learn something from them. And if you take an interest in them, they'll take an interest in you. Every person is a door into another world. They're worth learning from, and find a way that you can start talk to people next to you, people on public transportation. I know with COVID it's harder. Talk to people in line. Talk to people you meet everywhere, and start now, today. And that, believe it or not, is one of the most important things you can do for your business. I can't tell you how many times I've met people in airport lines that have been incredibly helpful to me in business. So,
Thank you, Professor Donald. I have different story. Actually, I'm from developing world, from Bangladesh. very small country. But I have experience to work with some of the extraordinary talented entrepreneurs. Because when I started my careers, uh, 2009, I start my career with a startup, educational corporations, and uh, in between 6 years, it's become few billion-dollar company. We do not have any investors. The entrepreneur do not have academic background. We do not have any kind of infrastructure. What today we are listening from USA, from Harvard University, from Japan. We do not have anything. Yes, we have people. You are correct. We have markets, and only we focus on the people and the customer, and it become very successful. Even some of the highly successful entrepreneurs from Daffodil Education Group, Mr. Sobu Khan, like that, he joined in World Talent Economy Forum. Cambrian Education Group Chairman, Mr. Bashars, like that, he joined in World Talent Economy Forum. So we have different story, but definitely we can learn from developed world, and we can develop better ecosystem. So Bahia, what you want to add for these interesting discussions? Most of our audience from developing world, uh, we have 100 of university as our partner. We definitely share our content with the university students. Like if you share your experience from Harvard Business School, how they support the entrepreneurs or new startup, maybe it will be helpful for our entrepreneurs and for our students.
Yeah, I think it was David or Donald that mentioned something that is actually quite important, is that this feeling of failure that you can have and the pressure of it. And something that is important is to say it's okay. It's something that really helped me. And at Harvard, were people that were telling me, look, it's very important for you to have a go out plan B. Put deadlines, milestones, and if you don't reach them during a certain time frame, just leave it out and take a job or move on something else. Because otherwise, the harder you move on, the harder it gets. Because you invest time, you invest money, and it's extremely, extremely hard. So that's my advice, is really, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Just be flexible. um, and also I think when I was at Harvard or even at MIT, there was a point of it's okay to fail. When I was working at Google, there is Google has our own, let's say, initiative, which is Moonshoot X, and they celebrate failure. When you fail, there is a party, and they say the earlier you fail, the best, and just move forward. And it's true that in India, in Asia, in Europe too, I think the US is quite an exception. Failure is seen like a sin on you. It's like, what? You failed. You are a misery. While in the US, when even we know that when you go to a CEO, they ask you, have you ever failed? And if you say no, you are out of any hiring process, because you must fail at least once to learn. Otherwise, just like not doable. That's something that really, really helped me. Um, and that's also a path of understanding it's my one's weaknesses or vulnerabilities, and asking for help. That's something that I will definitely share with the audience. And something else that helped me when I was at Harvard and MIT is there is a lot of women uh, who started their own ventures or starting them. And that's very important to have people from your own background that can understand especially how hard it can be. It was not my case, but you had people that were moms. Being a mom while an entrepreneur is extremely difficult. Um, Cases of women that were supposed to come back at home. It was not okay to be in the US starting a new venture when your mom, your family is waiting for you in your home country to get married. So something that is very important is this, uh, as Donald mentioned, the human resource that you may have access to. Um, and yes, I think the financial is true. It helps when you're at Harvard, MIT, you're graduated from there. People are more open, but at the end of the day, it's all about uh, who you are as a person. Is quite funny because I met many investors and they were like, you know, you have an idea today, tomorrow it will change, because that's the startup and entrepreneur journey. It will change. If it doesn't change, that's a problem. But you invest in the person. I can be a Harvard cum laude. I can be an MIT fantastic, well-known person. But if I am literally said stupid and disdainous person, unrespectful person, nobody's going to invest in me. He's going to invest in somebody who is resilient, which is willing to, just put its or his or her hands in the dirt and just in the clay and just move on and tighten the bell when it's needed, because it's not sometimes easy. And that's something also that I will say, just is not because we are not at a Harvard or in the Silicon Valley that we can't. I'm just saying entrepreneurs. Actually, when I went to India, I was so surprised by all the social entrepreneurs. The best ed tech actually are coming from India. When we think about Baiju, when we think about the Khan Academy, I mean, and you don't need so much resources. You just need the good people, and again, in the right time, in the right place, but especially the good people with the willingness to do it. And the passion, it's also a question of passion. It's important, that's true, when we start our venture, to look at the needs of the market, to be sure who is your next customer, does it exist, how do you distribute your good, etc., how do you market yourself. And that's definitely true, but you also need to be passionate about what you are doing, because if you are going to sell your product not only to client but to investors, if you don't believe in your product, you are done. And that's another advice that I will give to people.
Thank you. Thank you for your excellent advice. And another thing I just want to add, like in 2012, when I was in Oxford and Cambridge universities, that time I request high quality students and entrepreneurs, you should go for exchange program. We are coming to Oxford and Cambridge University for learning. You should go to Bangladesh or India or Malaysia. And naturally, they visited. And that's where they just exchange their experience. And this is also valuable for networking. This is also valuable for developing new market. So that may be another interesting things. And yes, hard work is important. I can remember, like, for growing this Cambrian group, 1,600 employees, day and night, 5 years. We work very hard, and ultimately we become successful. Thank you. This is really excellent session, especially for our audience. They can learn a lot of things about startup, and they can develop themselves. And we want to launch real-time startup development program. So especially Professor Adrian, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald Bahia, if you want to launch this kind of program, we are engaging with millions of people, but our audience from developing world, from we want more of your support. So I directly want to go for the concluding remarks for today. First, I want to give chance Professor Adrian. Sure. Professor Adrian.
Okay, thank you very much. It was a great session, and we learned so many things from all the great speakers, David, Donald, Bahai. It's fantastic. So I think for the audience, learn one. I think the take-home message would be to network, to you unless you can find be part of a network, get funding, then your idea will just stay in your head. So to really change the world, it means a lot of teamwork between the technologists and the entrepreneurs and the funders. Maybe the funders are the most important part of this equation. So do your best to network and get funding for your great idea. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Adrian. Professor David Smith, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Sharif, thank you again for letting me be part of this panel, which, as you can tell, I do have a passion in. A couple of quick tips. One of them is do get introductions from people you know, people of other companies. Make sure you get introductions to them and begin to do it. When you put your story, when you put what you're going to present to them, I have found it's more important to tell the story and even to have less information. Data and bullets in the deck don't sway investors. What takes your pitch from good to great is the story you tell and how it engages the imagination of the investor and the people you're trying to market to. One of the things I find really interesting is oftentimes when you're networking, and particularly when you're pitching for money and stuff, most entrepreneurs, starting entrepreneurs, never ask for money. They pitch their idea and they tend to think, gee, it's so that they will, on their own heart, think about, let me give you some money. No, you need to ask for money and be prepared to talk about things like what's the valuation, what will they get in return for it, and you need to be direct on your ask. Uh, One thing that's really interesting today is with so many things like Microsoft PowerPoint and Google Slides and all the others, the problem with those is they're great for putting your ideas together and pitching your ideas, but take the time to make a PDF of it. PDFs don't change depending on your operating system, your computer, the fonts you have on your machine. PowerPoints and Google Slides and everything will change. So do make a PDF of what you're presenting. Also, remember as you pitch, as you present it to others, to continue to update your deck. One of the fatal mistakes I've seen with startups is they create what they think is the best deck and get feedback from potential investors and others. Even as the market changes, they're doing the research they need to do. They forget to update the deck. That's a living, breathing document, and one that should be updated as you're going forward. So that's just a couple of quick tips. I love to go back to the Nike commercial that was popular for a while. If you have a great idea, if you can create and attract a couple of people to believe in it with you and who help you want to create that product, then just do it. Get started. Most startups, you don't need to leave your other full-time jobs at the very early part. Test it, refine it, begin to talk about it with others. See if you can get others attracted to you. See if you can get some initial funding, but just do it. And that's how the best ideas get started and they move forward. So Sharif, thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Donald, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Well, I want to support what others have been saying. The the importance of failure. Michael Porter is famous in business school for his 5 forces, and he wrote an article once saying that he should add a 6th force to it, which is the idea. It's basically competition and some other things that businesses need to keep in mind when they're assessing how they should behave. And he should add a 6th one, which is the ability to exit. In other words, companies sometimes become zombie companies where they're really not successful. They're just eating up money and they're never really going to succeed. But on a smaller scale, it's the idea of pivoting. And I had a venture capital friend told me once that he never invested in a company that wound up making what they invested in it to make. And all companies pivot. So don't worry about that. That's just something that's going to happen. Basically, what you start out with is a good, very good, sophisticated market research. And once you start testing the market, then you find out what's actually going to work, and then you do that. Something else I really want to emphasize is what David said, and it goes back to something I've said before, and David put it in a way I think is better, which is the story that you tell. Because ultimately your product is a story. I mean, certainly you learn to use it, but for the longest time until it's made and people are out there, it's really a story. I mean, and how you tell that story is absolutely key. And again, going back to the guy Suhas Patil, one of the reasons he said to tell everyone, he says, is because you can watch them and see how they respond. And the more you tell that story, if their eyes gloss over partway through the story, you're not telling it well. You just got to keep telling that story. Tell it to people in elevators. Tell it to people in laundromats. Tell it to everyone. And one of the things that people think of is they say, well, my idea is so great. It's so wonderful. I can't tell it to people. They'd steal it from me. And there was a time when I would get literally 50 business plans a week. And at any given period, 40 of them have the same idea. And that goes to something that Bahia was saying, which is that you've got to act. Ideas are a dime a dozen. When some cool idea is coming up, it's everywhere. Everyone has the same idea. And what the difference is for the people that make a company is that the people do it. There are some people who have the motivation to be able to actually go out and make things happen. And what Sharif was talking about, the fact that they did it with very little financial capital. Well, we talk about sweat equity. I mean, there's a whole theory of economics that labor is money, the labor theory of value. I mean, labor is money, and they could have been doing something else and getting paid for it, but they weren't. They took their labor and they made that happen. And that's what founders often do. They use the money that they could have been making and make a company with it instead. And so you've got to be willing to be flexible and be able to change. And then again, back to the unknown unknowns is when you run into something that happens and you don't know what it is. It's something that I've taught a lot inside of organizations, and when I'm teaching engineers, I often tell them, I said, unless something goes wrong, you're not learning anything. And so in my exercises during the class, sometimes somebody will say, yay, something went wrong. And I'll go over and explain to them what happened, and they'll say, yeah, because I'll tell them, I'll say, well, you can teach pigeons to type stuff out of books. I mean, what are you learning if you just copy the exercise out of a book? Nothing. And so it's the same with everything in life. But you can run into something that you can't figure out for the life of you why it's a problem. But in a company, you can just stand up and lean over the cubicle and ask the guy next to you what the problem is. And they've gone through the struggle themselves and spent the days or weeks it takes to be able to solve the problem. And they can explain it to you in 5 seconds. And so that's the point of being able to go out and meet everyone you can and tell your story to everyone you can, because then you have the resources to be able to ask the questions, be able to get the answers, to be able to do what it is that you need to find, because everything you need to know is somebody knows. And so that's kind of ties everything together, and that's what you're supposed to do in your closing
Thank you.
statement. So
Thank you, Professor
that's it.
Gerald. Thank you, Professor Trudy, for joining today. She is from Switzerland, and she has a very effective organization, AquaSPE. She is fellow from Tando. Thank you for joining. We are in concluding remarks, but definitely I gonna give you a few minutes that you can discuss about your organization and about entrepreneurship. Bahia, what's your concluding remarks for today?
Yeah, so I will definitely highlight two things. The first one about the importance of a support network of human beings, of peers that can understand you, of mentors, of experts that can help you to build your own ventures from different fields, from different backgrounds. And also people that can remind you to take care of yourself, to not end up burning out or feeling lonely, and support you in this wonderful but also very challenging journey that is entrepreneurship. And the second point that I will make is just okay to fail. And you must expect to fail. And the most important is to have a backup plan and to have it ready whenever you start. And be willing to completely pivot, to let go your initial ideas, to stop and start after, and honestly to celebrate failure. I mean, that's the Google mindset and it's working. So I will just say, yeah, own it. And every failure is a learning. I know it's easy to say, but I lived it. I saw everybody around me, everybody at MIT, everybody at Harvard failed at least one time. And that's how they can better support themselves and others. So that's it. I mean, I just encourage everybody to go ahead and not be afraid or censor themselves and their passion because of the failure of being judged, or to fail, or to be alone. So definitely, it's the path of the future again.
Thank you. Thank you. Professor Trudy. So, yeah, what you want to add for startup?
Yeah, give me some context, please. First of all, pardon me for being late, everyone. I had another meeting, so it's really a pleasure, and thanks for inviting me. I mean, my background, so you guys understand, is over 20 years of venture capital, and before that, industrial automation and manufacturing technology. And I left my job to follow my passion, which is knowledge sharing and looking at my lens of the world. We have such wicked problems and very complex supply chains and sectors, yet we haven't harnessed the power of the World Wide Web and all this great information technology. I think, Baya, you said, and Donald yourselves, this is about people. Yeah, big data is important. Data is important, but it doesn't. You don't do anything with it unless you can connect the people to it and the expertise, so that we learn and share what we've already learned, so we don't repeat the same mistakes over and over again. And in that context, that's why I left my full-time BC job over 10 years ago now, to create an open access, open core platform for knowledge sharing for the world's most critical sectors. And part of the other motivation for that was looking at the fact that almost all of the networks that we have are walled gardens and don't allow either external multiple companies or disciplines to interact. And those that have tried, as a lot of people have just been saying, it's a big graveyard out there of failures. I can talk for a long time about why, but this is a complex topic. This is not a simple app. And in order to, even the experts who've been dealing with knowledge management and knowledge sharing for many years will acknowledge that. So it's something that requires a combination of skills, and this is what we've tried to put together, and to make that platform available to anyone, to have provided in a SaaS format. And we focused on the first sector, on the water sector. So we launched our beta in 2010, which is an open access knowledge sharing platform for the world's water professionals. I'm really delighted to say today that we reach about 500,000 professionals every month. We have members from every single country in the world, including North Korea. 50% of the members are in a managerial role. We have an interactive, intelligent Q&A, and it's an AI tool-based platform, so it's smart and learns and tries to provide you with information that's contextually of value to you. So we connect people to people, meaning experts to experts in an area that they're of interest in, people to content. Content could be an article, a dialogue, a webinar, a product, and content to content. So it provides contextual cognitive correlation for something that's similar to. So if you're looking at, so this is the whole idea about different ways to find information and discover knowledge in an area that you're interested in. And that's my day job. That's my passion, and it's working. Yes, it's not. It didn't, when you turn it on, it's empty. So there are many different challenges as you go through the steps of development of a platform like that. And today we do have about 120,000 active members and about 200,000 page views a month. So I would say that we've proven the business model, the case, the need, and now we're moving to kind of stage 3, if you will, to really build that into a business and to provide the platform for other people, which is businesses, regions, to provide a knowledge sharing platform that's auto provisioned for anyone to click and go who has a need like that. That's all I want to say. I did have a comment to what I was listening in on, you guys, briefly, and that is, in all my over 20 years of experience as a VC, I've never seen a company go bankrupt because they run out of money. I've seen a lot of companies run out of money, but they don't go bankrupt until the founders give up. So that's my message. If there're going to be a lot of bumps along the road, and sometimes you just think it's the end, but it's never the end until the day that you actually say, I'm done, and you give up. So don't give up.
Yes. Yes, thank you, Professor. Definitely, we want more audience. So I saw in social media you have a very effective platform. So definitely, World Talent Economy Forum want to join in your platform, and we need some good audience from around the world. So thank you for joining today's sessions. This is really, really excellent content for entrepreneur, startup. Thank you, Professor David Smith, Professor Donald Bahia, and Professor Trudy for joining today's sessions. I request all of our audience share our content as much as possible with your government, with corporation and academy. Thank you. Bye bye and take care.